Prices are climbing, receipts are growing, and a political storm is brewing across the United States as former President Donald Trump unleashes a scathing attack on retail titan Walmart. At the heart of this escalating feud is a single question echoing through households, boardrooms, and congressional offices: who is really paying for the tariffs? Walmart's announcement that it could no longer absorb the cost of tariffs without raising prices on everyday goods sent shockwaves through the retail industry and set off a chain reaction of political, economic, and social consequences. The world's largest brick-and-mortar retailer, ran with more than 4,600 stores in the United States alone, and a customer base that touches nearly 90% of American households, didn't mince words. The numbers no longer worked. The math had caught up with the messaging. What began as an economic policy debate quickly became a nationwide financial reality. Shoppers began noticing the difference at the checkout line. Parents in suburbs and small towns found themselves making difficult choices, putting back snacks, skipping name brands, or eliminating non-essential items altogether. A mother in Missouri said she returned meat to the shelf and left the store with fewer groceries than planned. A father in Indiana admitted to packing less food in his children's school lunches to make ends meet. These aren't headlines. They're the lived experience of American families under pressure. For months, Walmart's leadership had downplayed the risk. CEO Doug McMillon cited past disruptions, including the aftermath of September 11th, to suggest the company could weather any storm. But that confidence evaporated when the financial reality hit. John David Rainey, the company's chief financial officer, appeared on national television to break the news. Tariffs, even when scaled down from an initial 145% to a still heavy 30% on Chinese imports, were now too steep to absorb without raising prices. This was not an emotional outcry. It was a data-driven, precise calculation. Walmart's operating margins are razor-thin, typically hovering around 4 to 5%. When costs rise, there's almost no room to hide. Walmart can buffer increases longer than most retailers, but even its reach has limits. With billions of dollars in revenue spread across hundreds of thousands of employees and millions of transactions, the company is a volume-based machine, one that needs stability and predictability to thrive. Trump's response was swift and characteristically blunt. In a weekend social media post written in all capital letters, he accused Walmart of using tariffs as an excuse to raise prices and demanded they eat the tariffs. It was a direct challenge, one that framed the retailer as greedy and disloyal, choosing profit margins over patriotism, shareholders over shoppers. But this wasn't a typical corporate feud. Walmart is not a hedge fund or a high-end tech company. It is America's storefront. It is where millions go not just to shop, but to live out their weekly rituals: groceries on Sunday, school supplies in August, gifts in December. Trump was not sparring with an elite outlier. He was attacking a brand rooted in everyday American life. Walmart didn't retaliate. Instead, it stuck to the facts. It issued a calm, carefully worded statement reiterating its goal: to keep prices as low as possible for as long as possible. But it made clear that shielding every category from price increases was no longer feasible. Essentials like milk, bread, and eggs would remain protected, for now. But electronics, clothing, and other discretionary goods were already seeing upward pressure. Industry analysts quickly saw the writing on the wall. Michael Baker, a veteran retail analyst, noted that Walmart's language during its earnings call was more direct than usual. Not by accident, but by design. The goal was to prepare customers, investors, and policymakers alike. This was no longer a hypothetical impact. The cost had landed. Walmart's move opened the floodgates. Within days, other major corporations began voicing similar concerns. Microsoft warned that hardware and gaming consoles could see increased prices. Subaru expressed worry over parts and supply chains. Best Buy acknowledged that its pricing model was under strain. Even companies that had previously stayed silent, such as Target and Dollar General, began including tariff language in their internal forecasts. One notable exception was Home Depot, which publicly stated it planned to hold prices steady. But analysts cautioned that such a position might only be temporary. After all, Home Depot, like Walmart, relies heavily on imported goods, and no amount of strategic positioning could fully counter rising import duties. This wave of corporate transparency marked a turning point in how companies approached the Trump administration's trade policy. For much of the former president's term, most businesses remained silent, wary of political backlash. But tariffs were different. They hit bottom lines. They triggered consumer price hikes. And they affected companies across every industry, from apparel to agriculture, from toys to tools. The response from financial markets was immediate. Walmart's stock dipped following its announcement. Though not catastrophic, the decline signaled growing investor anxiety. Market analysts from J.P. Morgan Chase and Morgan Stanley adjusted their forecasts for the retail sector, warning of continued volatility and reduced consumer spending. The bigger concern was what this meant for the broader economy. Nearly 70% of the United States' gross domestic product is tied to consumer spending. When families cut back, even a little, the effect ripples through manufacturers, shippers, logistics firms, and local economies. Already signs of contraction were emerging. In some cities, local grocers reported smaller basket sizes. In others, dollar stores saw a slight uptick in foot traffic, a sign that consumers were trading down, looking for relief from rising prices. Meanwhile, pressure mounted on lawmakers. Retailers, farmers, manufacturers, and trade associations flooded congressional offices with calls and letters. Behind closed doors, even Republican legislators began to express concern. In rural districts, once considered strongholds of support for Trump's trade agenda, constituents were growing restless. Public dissent within the Republican Party remained muted, but cracks had formed. A handful of representatives quietly acknowledged that they were rethinking their positions. They had heard from voters. They had seen the polling. And they knew that the economic recovery narrative was at risk if tariffs continued to drive up everyday costs without delivering visible benefits. At the heart of this collision lies a deeper ideological rift between political narrative and economic truth. Trump presented tariffs as a tool of strength, a way to punish unfair trade partners like China and restore American manufacturing. But the economic data told a different story. Tariffs function as a tax on imports, and that tax is paid not by foreign governments but by American businesses at the point of entry. Walmart's decision to speak publicly brought this reality into focus. It was not a political act, it was a business necessity. But Trump's backlash suggested otherwise. His messaging implied that companies should fall in line, not just with the policy, but with the political spin. This had a chilling effect. Other companies, watching from the sidelines, were now forced to calculate the risk of honesty. Speak out and face Trump's wrath? Stay silent and risk being accused of hiding the truth from customers? The balance was delicate. For Walmart, the calculus was different. With its enormous reach, deep brand loyalty, and infrastructure advantage, it could afford to weather a storm that might drown smaller players. But its message wasn't just self-preservation, it was a warning. If Walmart can't hold the line on prices, then no one can. Former executives weighed in too. Bill Simon, who once led Walmart's U.S. operations, criticized current leadership for not doing more to absorb the cost. But most experts pushed back, citing the company's tight margins and enormous scale. Walmart wasn't trying to spark a feud. It was trying to tell the truth. Even international observers noticed. Media outlets in Europe and Asia covered the clash, characterizing Trump's response as a form of economic intimidation. The concern wasn't just about tariffs, it was about the precedent. What happens to free enterprise when a president publicly attacks a company for stating economic facts? As the dust settled, Walmart held firm. It did not revise its financial guidance for the full year, a sign of stability, but it also did not offer detailed predictions for the next quarter. The uncertainty was too great. Tariffs had become the new variable, unpredictable, politically motivated, and financially painful. The retail sector braced for more turbulence. Earnings calls became more candid. CEOs who had once avoided discussing trade policy were now fielding direct questions about pricing, supply chains, and consumer behavior. The tariff debate was no longer abstract. It was immediate, and it was affecting people's lives. For the American public, the lesson was sobering. Tariffs are not invisible. They show up on receipts, on backpacks, on school supplies, on televisions and shoes. They are not paid by China. They are paid by you. In this new reality, transparency is no longer optional. Companies are being forced to choose between staying quiet or speaking truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Walmart chose the latter. And in doing so, it opened the door for a broader reckoning. For many voters, especially those in small towns and rural areas, the question is no longer ideological. It's practical. When will prices go down? When will the promises made begin to pay off? And if they don't, who will be held accountable? The trade war, once pitched as a bold path to prosperity, now bears the hallmarks of a silent tax, one levied on ordinary families, carried out at the register, and justified by politics. Walmart's announcement may have been the first loud signal, but the echo is growing louder by the week. In the end, this isn't just a dispute between a president and a retailer. It's a glimpse into the fragile state of the modern economy, where politics and commerce collide, where facts are contested, and where the truth still shows up at the checkout counter.